Apollo 11 was a major step in human history. The human race explored the frontier of the moon for the first time when Neil Armstrong stepped on its surface in 1969. It changed the course of history, both changing the way humans look at the moon as a species who have been there and by winning Americans the space race. Apollo 11 was the first manned mission to the moon. It lifted off on July 16, 1969 at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time and splashed down on July 24th at 12:51. It effectively ended the space race and changed the way humans look at the moon. The Apollo missions were started because of the space race, an international conflict between the two world superpowers of the time, the USSR, or the Soviet Union, and America. The space race was kicked off when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. Meaning fellow traveler, or Earth's companion, it shocked Americans into a contest of aerospace prowess that culminated in the Apollo missions, whose goal was to get an American on the moon before the Soviets. On May 20th, 1969, the Saturn V rolled out onto the pad. It took 5 hours to get to the place where it would launch. On the 16th of July, the astronauts got up at 4:15 a.m. to prepare. They got into the command module and began to prepare for launch. The countdown began and the engines were ignited. On July 16th, 1969, at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, the Saturn V lifted off. After 4 minutes and 42 seconds, the first stage was jettisoned and the second stage was ignited. 7 minutes and 27 seconds later, the third stage was ignited. 2 minutes and 20 seconds later, the spacecraft was now in orbit. Hours later, the third stage ignited once more and sent Apollo to the moon. After many other dangerous maneuvers, it was time to land. Michael Collins was orbiting above in the Columbia. As the lander approached the surface of the moon, Neil Armstrong noticed that the flight computer was guiding him to the rocky area. He took control, and the astronauts used most of their remaining fuel trying to land. He successfully guided the lunar lander to a safe spot and landed. Many years of hard work and dedication from people across the globe have led to this moment.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Later, the astronauts were returned safely to Earth. At the very heart of this mission is the first step on the moon. After that, the way humans viewed the moon changed. It was no longer something to dream about. It was something that could be done. Planetary scientist Dr. Sean Solomon says, the mission led to an explosion of new data about the moon. I included lunar work in my research agenda for a number of years thereafter, using data from all the Apollo missions, from findings of sample analysis to observations of the orbital and surface experiments that Apollo carried. Zooming out, it can have an impact on the human race as well as scientific fields. Dr. Solomon says that there really was no field of planetary science in 1969, just a handful of people who called themselves planetary astronomers and studied other worlds through telescopes or with theoretical work. NASA had sent spacecraft to Venus and Mars by the time of Apollo 11, so there were a few people who were working on planetary data, but the space age was less than 12 years old at the time of the first moon landing. Almost everyone who worked on the scientific return from the Apollo program came from other fields, earth science, chemistry, or physics, and they became lunar scientists. NASA's investment brought in huge numbers of scientific experts and funded new instruments and labs across the country to create a lunar community that hadn't been there before. Because of the developments of lunar science, Apollo 11 had a much bigger impact than just ending the space race, although that was important too. Thanks to Apollo 11 and the Apollo missions as a whole, missions to other planets seemed more possible, and a whole field of science emerged as a result. Additionally, it led to advances in technology required to get there and other fields, like geology, as well. Dr. Solomon says, landing humans on the moon and bringing them back safely was a formidable technological challenge, and the time within which that was accomplished was incredibly short. The first human spaceflight was in 1961. Kennedy's speech announcing we would go to the moon before the end of the decade was in 1961. Within only 8 years, we not only figured out how to send humans to the moon and get them back, but we actually did it. That was the first time in human history a person has set foot on another planetary body. It was something that will never happen again. Apollo also provided our first detailed look at another planetary body, and it showed us how special the Earth-Moon system is. It was the Apollo 11 mission that demonstrated convincingly for the first time how old the moon is. The samples brought back were more than 3 billion years old. We learned that the moon recorded and eliminated a period of solar system history that we hadn't begun to appreciate through our study of Earth. There's no rock history on Earth for the half billion years, but there is on the moon. And because the moon is our satellite, it is part of our history too. We learned how violent and chaotic the earliest history of the solar system was. We wouldn't have gained that perspective without leaving Earth. Thanks to this, the field of geology was furthered and gained new viewpoints. The Apollo missions and Apollo 11 in particular led to new advances in many fields, including geology, planetary science, and many more. In a day where we look forward to the moon and attempt to go back, we can look back and see what we did to continue on.